Hello, and welcome to the Stratford Experience Show. And right now, the whole of Stratford, the whole of the Stratford constituency, is having an experience of a general election, or the run-up to a general election. It's just less than 2 weeks now until everybody gets to cast their vote, those that choose to vote. Normally, it's 74,000 is the size of the electorate, and normally about 3/4 of those actually cast their votes. So perhaps this time, maybe more. Now, some are speaking with some degree of authority, claiming that this is a two-horse race. Well, I'm not sure everybody agrees with that, and my guest today might have something to say on that matter. So I'd like to welcome, without further ado, my guest today. We have spoken before, but seeing as he's standing as a candidate in this election, I thought I'd have him on again to talk to. Kevin Taylor.
Thank you very much, Peter. Pleasure to be here. Thanks again for inviting me back to the show. Thoroughly enjoyed the last one. And who would have thought we'd have been here almost 6 months later, something like that?
Yes, it was.
Yes. And I would be standing in the general election.
Yes.
As an independent candidate.
Well, that's quite a thing, isn't it? Quite a thing. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was 6 months ago, and I did say I wanted to do something on the parliamentary representation, but at that point we had no idea you were going to be standing. And then the election was announced not very long ago, and so with quite short notice, you decided. You said you were thinking about it.
I'd thought about it for a very long time, to be quite honest. It's never gone out of my mind about sort of working for the community. I thoroughly enjoyed many aspects of my 4 years in council, but more related to the work with the community rather than the political side of it, which I never really enjoyed. The mayoral year obviously allowed me to connect incredibly well with a huge cross-section of the community. And I looked at the political spectrum, and really I've become disillusioned with national politics, full stop. And a few weeks before we finally made the decision, I actually thought there isn't anyone on that list that I could vote for. And I thought maybe there are lots of people in the constituency that actually think the same. And I've always listened to the community ask for local representation, someone that is visible to them, someone that will work for them on a very hard basis. And I felt that I ticked all those boxes, and I thought it was time to just see whether the community would support me. And right at the death, we put the application in. We're not, as I said before, I think in our previous interview, I'm not a wealthy person by any means, so obviously it's pushed us to the limits at the moment. We're running on a very small budget. We've had the support of some great people so far. There won't be a huge amount of leaflets going through people's doors, but we're doing it in a slightly different way of utilising what we've got to speak to as many of the communities in the constituency as we can.
Right. Because to stand as an MP, I mean, it's quite a thing, for anyone to. It's one thing thinking about it; it's another thing doing it, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Because potentially, if you were elected, you'd have a whole new life, wouldn't you? It would be a whole new life.
I think if I look at the mayoral year in particular, then I always have fond memories of obviously making that decision. First of all, I spoke to people who'd previously done the role, a number of them, and I listened to how they'd made the decision and how they'd how they'd carried out the role and other things that they'd done. And after listening to all of them, I thought, how can you actually do more than one role and do it well? Yes. And so I made that very brave decision to say, right, I just want to concentrate on delivering for the community through that year. And so I made the very brave decision, and I don't think there is any other mayor that had ever done this in this town, to give up work for a whole year, live off our savings, and therefore treat it as a job. And it used to give me huge satisfaction of walking through that town in the morning, stopped by virtually numerous people as I walked in, would ask questions, would say, can you advise on this, can you advise on that? And there was one thing I always used to say to everyone: that door is always open, and if you've got something you want to talk to me about, just knock on that door and I'm always here. Yes. And I think, in a way, there were lots of people through that year who said, we'd love you to be our MP.
Did they?
Yeah. Oh. And so, in a way, the way I carried out the mayoral role, I see toward a lot of synergy, and that's what people would get on a much larger scale.
Yes, because this is bigger than Stratford upon Avon town, isn't it?
And of course, you know, having had a toe in the water with local town council, obviously is at the bottom of a political system, so it has the least power in the authorities around here. So you are quite limited in what you can actually achieve and deliver, and so maybe going straight to the top of that system is the only way to get the best for our constituency.
Now, Kevin, I interviewed him on the second show, so we went into some details about how you came to be in Stratford and your mayoral role, which was 22. It's a year long. So we talked all about that. So if you're interested in knowing more about how Kevin came to be in Stratford and the things he's done in the town, then you can watch the second episode if you're interested. That's really, really, yes. But have you spoken to any MPs about what life is like?
No, I've never, I don't think. I mean, obviously I've had during the mayoral year, we met briefly our previous MP on a number of occasions, and obviously not the most popular person in the world with the majority of the constituency. And
do you mean now? Do you mean recently, or do you mean?
I don't think he ever has been really. From I mean, obviously. He got quite a few votes though, didn't he? Well, initially, I mean, obviously he was parachuted in here in the first place he didn't live in the constituency when he first came here.
Had no connections whatsoever with Stratford, yes.
But you are quite right. In a number of elections, he had a huge majority. And I think through that period of time, this is obviously an established Conservative safe seat.
Over 100 years.
So
it's been, yes.
I think there was a greater confidence level then in the Conservative Party by the electorate here, who have always supported that party.
Yes.
I think, obviously, then Nadine made a few key mistakes through his terms, and obviously there's lots of people who always talk about heating stables and tax payments, and obviously, you know, there are probably people in every walk of life who do the same things, but when you're an MP, it's highlighted far more. So obviously, by then, he's suffering these things at the same time that the Conservative Party begin to implode. And who would have thought in any period of time that we would have seen so many prime ministers in such a short period of time? So I think even if you look back at 100 years or whatever or however many years it was could any of the electorate actually turn around and tell us what those MPs actually achieved for the town and the constituency?
That's a very good point. I don't know. I was saying to Pauline before we started filming that every time an election comes around, we're given all these promises, aren't we? The political parties, the candidates make all these promises.
Yeah.
How many of those promises have ever actually been
it's a very good point.
kept to?
At the hustings on Monday, a gentleman asked a question about manifestos, and I actually said in my answer, has any government ever actually achieved one of what they set out to do? And I think you'll probably find the answer is no. I find this frustrating in whatever I'm doing, and I'm a manufacturing guy at heart.
Right.
I've spent 30 plus years in the manufacturing sector. We're very professional. So we deal with the largest automotive companies in the world. And believe me, you have to be great quality, on time, all the time to keep your business.
Yes.
So when you make statements of I am going to deliver this at this time, you stick to it.
Well, if you don't,
because if you don't, you've got no business. So I find it frustrating that for me, when I look at the political world, no matter what party they represent, that people make statements that they're never going to achieve, and you know, they're impossible to achieve. And you know, I'm tired of hearing recently fully funded or fully budgeted manifesto, because they're not.
Right.
You know, I mean, and so, you know, I just think it's a sad state of affairs that we almost cajole people to vote for us, really, on some pretty poor information that we throw together in so-called manifestos.
Again, that's a very good point. And the frustrating thing is, for a few weeks, everyone's jumping up and down saying, vote for me, I promise you this, and I'll do this for you, and I'll give you this. And then you kind of go, okay, well, I've got to pick someone, I suppose. You pick someone to vote for, you vote for them, and then your voice is silenced for the next 5 years. They don't want to know you, do they? They don't really want to know you.
And of course, we have this, I think, if I look back at my life, and I look back at, I came from a very working class area, and there was a difference in sort of the 70s and 80s. There was a clear definition of where you were politically, really. In the street I grew up in, everyone was a Labour voter.
Yeah.
Everybody's father worked in the same factory.
Yeah.
Most of the mothers stayed at home. It was Labour dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the business owners in that town and the shopkeepers were the Conservative voters. So there was a real definition of where you were. Mm. That doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So there is no, you know, I suppose it may exist in a small percentage of business criteria, but we have this huge middle ground where people move from one to the other, and it almost becomes, oh right, I voted for those guys for the last 12 years, and I'm not happy with what they're doing now, so I'm going to vote for the other guys now. We're going to bring them in, and let's see what they can do, and possibly at the end of 12 years of those, they're going to go back to the ones they voted for before.
Yes.
And I'm not sure whether that's a good thing. You know, I mean, as I said, I wouldn't have had a clue who to vote for, because I don't see anybody that, from a leadership point of view, from a plan of what they think they are capable of doing, there's very little substance behind any of it.
Yeah. Now, this constituency has been regarded as a safe Conservative seat for over 100 years. 1906, I think, was the last time. From 1906 to the present day.
I think there was one guy who moved across the house.
There was that anomaly, wasn't there? There was that, but they were elected originally as Conservatives. And I have a confession that my first vote, when I got the vote at 18, the first vote I cast was Conservative. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, because my mum and dad voted Conservative.
Yeah.
I didn't study the subject. Yeah. I just thought, well, it worked for them, so I'll just vote for that. And my parents were quite involved in fundraisers for the party and so on. So I didn't question it much, at the time. I just went along with what they did. I followed their lead. But then in later years, I started to look at it and I thought, well, hang on, what's the difference really between which colour you vote for. We all see.
Yeah.
We always seem to end up with the same thing.
Yeah.
But also, people say, I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative. They identify themselves as a conservative. But what is a conservative? What is a conservative? I've asked people this question, and I've showed them things that I've written, and they haven't been able to disagree with anything that I've written about what I think is important. Now, I was at the Warwickshire County Council in 2019 attending a debate there about whether or not I should declare a climate emergency. Okay, now that wasn't my favourite. I would have preferred it to be labelled an environmental emergency, which is more encompassing. The deputy leader, he had some interesting views about the whole thing. I'm not quite sure he was totally on board with the whole thing. Well, I know he wasn't. But nevertheless, he felt outnumbered, and he did eventually vote for it. But he stood up at one point just to speak his truth, and he said, what I believe in, the important things are to have a roof over your head and food on the table. And I thought, well, I cannot disagree with that. Of course, that's number one importance for us in this country, isn't it? Certainly. Have a roof over our heads and food on the table. But the thing is, how big a roof is it? How much food? How do you go about getting the money to pay for that roof and that food, etc.? Those are areas where we might we might not agree. For example, if your money is made, I don't know, through fossil fuel shares in a fossil fuel company or arms trading or something like that, then that's perhaps not the best way to. That's probably not the cleanest money to be paying for that kind of thing. And also, how do you build the houses? Are they built from sustainable materials? But at the core of it, yes, there are things that we surely, no matter what party you think you align with most closely, there are core things that we surely must all agree upon. That we all need shelter, we all need food, we all need a clean, healthy environment, surely, because we've got pollution. No one can deny, whatever they think about climate change, no one can deny that human activity has polluted the environment. We've got microplastics in our bodies now, which is causing all sorts of medical conditions. It's disrupting normal processes in the body. Air pollution, obviously not good. Water is polluted here in our river. And that's a topic that's been raised by some of the candidates in our election here. The river is polluted, high levels of not only phosphates, which are the sewage-related things, but nitrates, which are to do with agriculture, the agricultural practices using fertilizers and so on.
Yeah, I was listening to someone speak on this subject on the radio recently, and obviously they were talking about using nitrates and the fact that sometimes even rainfall into field areas will take some of those nitrates into the water course.
Right.
So I think you've raised some valid points. Obviously, as a manufacturing guy, if I look at housing, employment, some of the things that you've touched on there, I grew up in a very working class environment, as I've said before. So I was born in a council house, and no very fond memories of growing up in a street that was dominated by working class people who worked in a factory. But the factories were right on our doorsteps. So I can remember walking into our garden, and you had huge stacks that churned out smoke every day.
Yes.
And no one, obviously, back in those days, it never seemed to be any importance to anyone really. Later on, obviously, when I moved into the manufacturing sector in the 80s and 90s, it became. I mean, the manufacturing sector very often is way ahead of everybody else. So obviously, way back in my employment days, probably in the 90s, we were already looking at the environmental impact of manufacturing on communities and the movement of product. So we took out all cardboard, and we were in reusable containers that are recirculated through the system. We looked at OHAS and emissions, and we put in filtration systems and stacks.
So this is before any government legislation.
Yeah. And there was an accreditation created by, it would have been at the time, people like BSI, who created an accreditation called ISO 14001, which all manufacturing companies, if you wanted to deal with Ford Motor Company, BMW, all of those, you had to comply to this accreditation. And we, some of the companies I worked for got that back in the 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
And I worked for a company for 14 years, and we recycled everything. So every pallet was recycled, every piece of plastic. We bought a compactor, and we used to compact it into cubes, and we sold it into a recycling system. So our impact on was minimal. So I'm quite surprised later on, many years later, that everyone else then says, because the manufacturing world will way in front of everybody else. And maybe, again, as I always say, there's governments, local authority, could learn a huge amount from that sector. They're probably the most professional that you could ever work in.
Right.
Water quality, obviously for 18 years, again, manufacturing companies use a huge amount of water. And I'm not too sure whether anybody's aware of it. 10 years of my working life was spent in the electroplating industry. So we used water to filter, to actually use as part of the process. So if I simplify it for everyone, if you did chemistry at school, if you look at the copper sulfate experiment, you have an anode and a cathode and a copper solution. You put a piece of metal onto the anode and the cathode, and it puts copper onto the piece of metal. That's how electroplating works. So in using that water, you're actually contaminating that water with the chemicals that you're using. So predominantly the largest process that any plater will do in this country is zinc. So I worked with Severn Trent for 18 years, and we were allowed a percentage of every chemical that we used to put back into the watercourse. And as long as we stayed within it, not a problem.
Some level that was deemed to be safe.
Yeah, so parts per million into the watercourse. So you could have zinc, you could have phosphate, and as long as it stayed within that parameter, we were perfectly okay. However, I would say through that 18-year period, I don't know what's happened within the Severn Trent organisation, because these guys were very, very tough through that period. More professional. If you overstepped the mark and put something into that watercourse, believe me, the consequences were very severe immediately. And I'm talking about 25 and 30,000, £100,000 fines, and almost threats of closure of your business. So if they were that strict on the business sector, I cannot understand what's happened in the development of the Severn Trent organisation, that they'll now contaminate the watercourse themselves. And I have to say, if I was the CEO of Severn Trent, whether I was satisfying shareholders or not, I would be embarrassed that I was contaminating the watercourse I'm supposed to be keeping.
It publicly
I think it was public. I don't think it was publicly owned.
When
it was.
When you were dealing
it's not
with
now,
it's
but
not
it
now.
was when I was dealing with them.
Is that interesting? Is that
I think it is. Yeah, but you still. But even if you take it out, even if you change, you still have an onus to deliver, not just to the shareholders. You have an own. I mean,
it should be.
Even if you look at the health and safety regulations within manufacturing, if you have an accident in your company, then the CEO or the managing director is the responsible person, is the person who can be prosecuted.
But do you think
so? Surely, if Severn Trent are contaminating the water to the level that they are, and someone suffers something from being contaminated in that water in the same level, then their CEO is surely prosecutable in the same way, which can be a custodial sentence.
But nobody ever
Well,
goes to jail, do they?
No,
Over these
no,
things.
no.
Do you think there's been a trend towards prioritising or giving priority treatment to the people who, the people who make the money, the shareholders, over the customers?
Well, I think when we the only thing, I think probably in this case, definitely. But I think when we look at shareholders, and there's always this inclination that it's all these wealthy people that are, I would imagine there's quite a few pension funds.
Yeah. Well,
I would imagine there's
not
quite
little pensioners, but pension funds.
pension funds.
Funds, yes. They're managed by professional people.
Yeah.
Yes.
That then filter into a huge amount of people
Yes.
in the community.
Yes.
But definitely, there is an imbalance here in what they are giving to shareholders in preference to what is actually being delivered.
Yes.
And their commitment is to have a watercourse that's perfectly acceptable for everyone to utilise.
Well, that should be it, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
That should be the number one priority, really.
Exactly.
If somebody makes a bit of money, then fine.
It's a bit like, let's go back to manifestos.
Okay.
I'm going to do all these things.
Yeah.
So their top priority
Yes.
is to give everybody clean water.
Well, yes.
So if you're not doing it, you
If it's-
failed, quite simply.
Yes. If it's not happening with the setup as it is.
So if that was in a manufacturing company and somebody continually failed to deliver, you'd be dismissed.
Yes.
You'd be, even if you look at it in, I always like a footballing analogy occasionally. So
Why not?
if you finish bottom of the league, or you get relegated, you get the sack, and somebody else comes in to do the job.
Yes.
Maybe Severn Trent need to employ Sam Allardyce as their CEO.
Yeah, maybe.
Because he rescues everything.
Well, at the hustings, which I watched, you didn't get a chance to respond on,
I tried to.
On the river.
I tried to.
On the river one, on the water thing.
I tried my hardest to attract the attention
but you didn't get
of Will, but
a thing on that one. So
he moved on.
If you want to do that now, you can.
I think most of what I've said there really is what I was going to say. Obviously, I have direct experience. In that 10 years of working in that industry.
But also you said something about...
We had our own filtration plant on site. So we had a tower that we put all the water through and we filtered it down, and it took out what we called filter cake at the bottom, which was a sediment. And we used to test the water every day. Yeah. And believe me, you could look at a beaker and you would think, wow, that's perfectly drinkable.
Sure.
And then when you looked at the chemical breakdown of what was in there, it was horrific.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, obviously, we had to amend or refilter things before we could actually put it back into the watercourse. I'll be deadly honest, one day, Severn Trent turned up at our site and I thought it was the police. There must have been 8 cars that turned up on our car park one afternoon, and they shut us down. There and then, we'd gone over on a zinc content. They'd picked it up at the nearest filtration centre, and they put a monitoring device in our car park, and they put a guy there for 3 days until we got it back under control. And in the end, what we had to do is we had to reinvest in a larger our output had got such a large volume by that point that our filtration plant was struggling to keep up with it. So we had to reinvest in a new filtration plant. But we got fined £25,000 for that. Wow. And I remember saying to the guy from Severn Trent, can you actually prove that that's us? And he said, no. And he went, but you are the largest user in the area. Right. There are lots of other companies that use this, and it could be one of them, but because you're the largest, we're fining you. Right, okay. And you know, I know lots of people in the electroplating industry, particularly through the 80s and 90s, that received huge fines. And you know, and some that were put out of business. Yeah. So it was, so that, you know, if you're actually doing that one side of it, I cannot understand why then you pollute it yourself, the other side. Because that day that happened, their filtration plant, which was in a place called Coven Heath in Wolverhampton, which was about 10 miles from our site, they'd picked it up there and they'd actually stopped it getting into the watercourse. So they'd held it there and refiltered it. So it never actually got there. Right. So this is a company that had so many things in place to stop these things happening. What's gone wrong?
Do you have some insight? I mean, we're spending a bit of time on this subject, but it is up on the list with other parties. They're mentioning it, that they're going to do something about it. But it sounded like you kind of...
I mean, I've spoken to a guy in the manufacturing sector recently, and we were talking about their frustration that when they see ministers elected, once they're in, when they select ministers within a government, that these guys have got no experience of what they're actually dealing with. And so one thing for sure, because I've worked in so many different industries, got a huge knowledge of obviously the guys that test the water here every day or test it, I've done it every day. I've seen it done every day for 10 years. I know the system, but I know how Severn Trent operated through that period. And believe me, they were a very professional company. So something has gone drastically wrong in their organisation.
Right. So it sounds really like you'd be the best man that Stratford probably has on the list of candidates to actually sort something out with our...
Yeah, I would actually be interested in seeing what they actually test for here and what they're looking for. And maybe I could quite easily take some of this water from there and take it back to the electroplating company I used to work for and get them to break it down even further and tell you what else is in there.
Okay, so we've got industry, yes, but then we've got the sewage, Severn Trent themselves allowing raw sewage. Yeah.
I mean, on the sewage side of things, all I would say is I don't know whether people, I certainly remember this. So as a working class kid, we never had many holidays. But when we did holiday, we always holidayed in Blackpool.
Yes.
And I can say even in the 1970s their local water always pumped sewage straight into the sea. And that was virtually daily.
Yes.
So there were seaside locations that have been doing this since the 60s, 70s.
Yes.
So it has happened. It has happened periodically before in other areas.
Yeah, cool.
The other thing is, obviously, if you look at the drainage system in the country, lots of it is Victorian times. Yes. And even if you look at new construction.
Right. New housing.
Very often, it's probably not been done to the capacity that you need. And I'm going to use an example now of the Birmingham Road. Mm-hmm. And if you look, every time we have heavy rainfall in the Birmingham Road, the water goes down and the water comes straight back up. And if you look at the colour of the water, there's obviously some form of sludge or sewage coming back up with that. The other thing is, if you look at, and this is a delicate subject, I suppose, but there are lots more things that get into the drain now than we used to get in there, which are not good for the system. Yes, so whenever we talk about solving a problem, there are lots of people down that chain that actually contribute to it. And maybe even as individuals, if we didn't chuck some of the stuff that we do, it would help a little bit in solving the problem.
Yes, indeed. But there's also a little loophole in the kind of the joining up between the planning system and the infrastructure. When a new development is being proposed, new housing development, they're supposed to sort of make sure that the services are adequate for but it never gets to happen.
Again,
apparently.
I can't speak from experience here, but all I will say is that if I look at what people tell me sometimes, and sometimes, again, maybe I make things too simple, but you know, in my working life, if I've given somebody a job to do something, then it's quite simple. We check to see whether the work has been done satisfactorily before we pay anyone.
Right.
And if we, you know, I mean, during the time in manufacturing, I helped project manage the buildings and extensions to our sites. So we did things like drains, we did electrical substations, and undoubtedly we only paid them 25% up front of what the contract was. And if there was something not quite right, stage by stage,
Yes.
it got redone
Yes.
straight away before it went any further.
Right.
And if there was something that wasn't right when it was finished, we didn't pay them until they came back and put it right. So to me, I don't know whether these are in place in what you're talking about. They should be.
There's lots of things that should be in place, but that's one little
And to
loophole.
me, they're quite basics.
Yeah. There's just, it isn't quite joined up, so that the developers end up going, well, we've got to connect to the existing mains because there's no other option. And
Even if I look at, I'm going to use Town Hall as an example. So during the mayoral year, we refurbished the exterior of the building. And at the time, the town was just coming out of the pandemic, and there'd been barriers and restrictions, and there'd been other scaffolding up around town, and suddenly we put scaffold up all outside the town hall and create a little bit of problem on the corner with that traffic. And Messenger were the company that were doing this for us, and I used to sit down with those guys every day, and at the first meeting I said, how long is that scaffolding going to be up? And he went, 20 weeks. And I went, right, okay. And so everybody that used to stop me in the street complaining about it, I used to say, don't worry, it's going to be there for 20 weeks and it will be there no longer. And every day I sat down with Messenger and I said, how are we doing? How's the project progressing? What have you done today? And when we got to 16 weeks, I walked in that morning and the guy went, we've got a problem. And I went, what's that then? He went, we're going to overrun, that scaffolding's going to be there for another... I went, we're not. I went, because you told me it was coming down on 20 weeks. I went, why is it staying up? And he went, because we need to do some work round the back still. I went, well, that's fine. You can leave it up round the back, but you're taking it all down on the front. And that's what we did. And so, you know, maybe if I hadn't have been there at that time, it would have just run on to 24 weeks.
Yes.
Without for no reason, they wouldn't have been using the front.
Yes, but it might.
And to me, that's what I've been used to delivering.
Sure.
You know, if I make a promise to somebody on a delivery time, I want to keep it. And even if I've had to change the processing method, or alter something, or manage something, I do it.
But for the company, it might have been cheaper for them to remove all the scaffolding at the same time.
I can categorically tell you now that scaffolding cost £44,000 for the period of time for 20 weeks.
Wow. Yeah. So they might have. Look, well, we can.
So it would have cost them more money. So I saved them money. So if they'd have gone another 4 weeks, they'd have been paying another £10,000 possibly for it being there.
Oh, I see. Yes.
So I saved them £10,000.
Oh well.
So everybody was happy.
Well, that was good.
Yeah,
that's a good outcome, then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, okay. So, party politics. Party politics. We talked a bit about it last time, how it's become this adversarial thing. The last MP, apparently, our mutual friend was telling me he was very in the know about the whole process of how he was selected, and right at the end, the question was asked, you know, if something came up and you had the choice between doing what was right for your constituents or voting with the party, what would you do? And he said he would vote in the way that benefited the constituents. Okay? But if you look at his record, that's not what he did. You know,
I mean,
it's not what he did. His record is that he was a loyal...
Yeah. I've not looked at his record.
I have, yeah.
Some people have... Well, I hadn't purposely.
No.
It's been shared out there recently. So I did see it. and what you're stating is correct.
Okay.
From from
There
the
might have
day,
been a couple of abstentions.
from the
but
data that has been shared.
generally, it's just vote with the party line on every matter.
I mean, this is something, this is why I'm standing as an independent.
As an independent, yes, because you won't have that.
Because I don't believe in towing party line. I think you're there to represent your constituents.
Yes.
And they are the priority.
Should be, shouldn't
it?
it?
And the delivery of whatever you can in that region is your number one priority.
That's what it should be.
Above anything else.
But what it's become is there seems to be the loyalty to the party and the party's interests seem to be placed ahead of the people's interests.
Definitely.
You'd agree with that?
I'd agree.
Would
with
anybody else
that.
agree with that? Yes, I think that's kind of I think that's a feeling out there that the people aren't being properly represented. Their wishes, their needs aren't being properly catered for.
But that goes back to what I said earlier by saying, if you looked at the last 100 years, tell me what they've bought.
Right.
Show me what influence. Show me something show me something that was done in the last 14, 15 years.
Yes. I don't know. Maybe there's somebody out there that's got some great examples of promises that were made and then delivered upon on time, on schedule. I don't know of any. But I know of plenty where things have been promised and not delivered on, or certainly not delivered in a way, in the form that they promised. Brexit, for example. Lots of promises were made about
Disastrous.
How good that was going to be for us all.
Well, there is a classic example, isn't it? If I look at what I said about manifestos, people have become experts in very clever marketing techniques. Mm-hmm. And we can all remember the bus with the huge amount of money on the side. And we can all, and another classic example recently is listening to Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak saying £2,000 tax about 30 times in the same conversation, and for a week or 2 weeks, the thing on everybody's mind or conversations in every factory, club, pub was £2,000 tax.
Yep.
People believe these. The more you tell someone something, believe it. I mean, I remember the Brexit campaign, and I remember driving to different customers at that point, and everywhere I seemed to go was a huge sign somewhere saying, vote to leave. But I never saw anything selling let's stay right until the last minute. For me, obviously, I've worked with European manufacturers for 30 years, plus, lots of them are good friends. Right. Still friends now.
Yes.
In particular, my relationship with a number of German manufacturers and logistics companies out there, very good. The day after the Brexit vote, and I brought this up at
the Hustings.
At the Hustings.
Yes.
Well, the company I was working for went from making profit to losing 30%
Yep.
overnight. We had to give everybody a 45% increase. Which we got, fortunately, and so we survived. But, it made things incredibly difficult. Relationships were strained. People couldn't believe what had happened. And even now, working in the logistics industry, when someone contacts us and says, well, we've got to take this into France or Germany or Italy or Spain, it's a huge task now. And the on costs are incredible. And we've had 2 instances this year. So we did all the paperwork. And one job going into Paris, one job going to Spain. And on the paperwork that had been created, there was just one little error on the vehicle registration number by one digit.
Right.
Both those vehicles were turned back to the UK.
Right, wow.
And we had to drive all the way back and redo all the paperwork again and then take it back. Wow. Now, had we not been in Brexit, you'd have just had one document and a CMR, and you'd have just sailed through it.
Yeah. Sailed through. Now that's a segue. I'm going to link this in now because we're filming today from the marina. So thanks to John Dews and his wife Heather for hosting us today. It's great. We've got we're able to use that. And that bit of noise that came in just a minute ago was an outboard motor, I think, being tested there. So that's in a real live.
I love this location actually because it's got a very special.
Okay.
I first met John during my mayoral year, and obviously this fell within my constituency ward as a councillor. And I remember John contacting me about this project.
Right.
We'd come out of the pandemic, and obviously they'd had temporary areas outside here.
Yes.
Which didn't look particularly good. So he'd come up with this amazing design. And I remember coming here and him showing me the actual drawings and looking at it, and I'm thinking, from somebody who's worked in engineering and manufacturing, I'm thinking, wow, this guy's a genius. And then he told me it had been rejected from a planning point of view, and I went, really?
Yeah.
And he said to me, would you come and speak on my behalf at the planning meeting as an appeal? And I went, yeah, of course. And it was a very long evening. We had to wait, I think, till about 8:30, 9 o'clock for our pitch. But I spoke on his behalf, and at the end of that, the planning committee, as they were then, overturned the decision of the officers and granted the permission. And here we are today. And I think it looks amazing. Yeah. And
what I liked, I saw it for the first time completed last week. And things that spoke to me are the eco credentials.
Yeah.
He has a heat exchanger in the kitchen, so the heat from that then heats this area, the seating area, I presume. And then he's got the awnings to...
Great design.
Great design. The windows that come down, we've got the windows. You can't see them in the shot here, but these are all up at the moment, but they can come down halfway. So it's lovely. You've got an outdoor, indoor space. And so eco-design is something that I'm personally interested in. And I recently shared some designs with you because it's the subject of housing. Housing is a big... It's not on anybody's manifesto. I haven't seen it on anybody's local manifesto. None of the local options have housing on there. But actually, it's a big problem. Not necessarily for the people more mature, older people who are established, they have a home, it's all bought and paid for, they're okay. But for young people trying to get on the ladder, the average house price in the Stratford area is hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Housing is an interesting subject.
Is it? Do you want to talk about it?
I look at this from probably a different perspective, and I look at, obviously, again, I grew up in a manufacturing area, so there were industrial companies there that had actually built housing for their employees.
Okay.
And the philosophy was there to keep their employees local.
Yes.
To their places of work. And if you look nationally, the greatest model that has ever been produced in this country is Bourneville. And if you look at Cadbury's as an example, the Cadbury method or methodology of creating that village workplace was genius for its time. And so you had the huge employment, enormous amount of housing for the employees predominantly.
And there weren't piddly things, were there?
No. You had a great mix of, even if you drive through there now, the actual mix of housing is incredible.
They weren't stacked up on each other.
Green spaces.
Gardens.
It's so I've never understood why people, I always say sometimes the best ideas are someone else's. And to me, there was a model that could have been rolled out all over the country. And even now, if you know, I mean, if you look, let's do a comparison. So let's look at Bourneville, and then let's look at Telford, Redditch, and Milton Keynes as modern day creations of new towns. Which one would you prefer? And there is no comparison. So you would say the Bourneville model is always the same, is always what we should work to. So from a housing point of view, I grew up in a council house.
Social housing.
Yeah, everybody in, I would say, a good 25% of the town where I lived grew up in a council house. If I look at my own parents, they never wanted to buy a house. They were quite happy renting, and you know, they you know, everybody then treated a council house just. If you walked to, I have fond memories of our street, and I could walk along. I still know the names of all the people who lived in our block. And I remember these immaculate gardens, clean footpaths. They treated their properties with amazing respect.
They had pride.
Yeah.
But were the rents?
Rents were low.
Low.
Yeah,
they weren't
rents were low.
taking the lion's share of their income.
No. So
Yes.
to me, if I look at, now I'm going to use Stratford as a model now. So here all you've seen is house building for a number of years, and not always the right mix of house building that you need, but no employment.
Yes.
So the employment level stays the same, but we just bring more people to live here. So they immediately become commuters. So they contribute towards
Then we wonder why
congestion,
yes.
emissions.
Yes.
So the ideal scenario of growing a town or city is to create employment and housing. So maybe some of the things that we've done on the perimeter of the town and the constituency should have been more driven to creating science parks and industrial estates and encouraging people to create larger businesses on the outskirts, and then created the housing for people to come and work in. Because at the moment we just make it more, and it's not just here, it's nationally.
Yes.
We, you know, if I look at the impact in the 70s and 80s, 90s, we were still this huge manufacturing centre in the world where everybody wanted to buy our components. When that went into decline, predominantly mainly through Far Eastern competition, all that was replaced with was leisure and retail, which employs far less people on 0-hour contracts. And so it doesn't have the same impact in creating wealth within a community.
Right.
I mean, I was talking to some, in the hustings, I'm going to diversify slightly here, but I'm going to, this is, I think it's relevant. So in the hustings, someone asked me a question to say, what's the thing that irritates you the most in Stratford? And I said the BHS building. So I saw an announcement this week which says, we're still talking with the people who own them, and they're in Guernsey or Jersey or wherever it was, so it's really difficult to communicate with them. We may have to purchase it, but we haven't got the money to purchase it at the moment.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, right, for the last how many years, all I've heard is projects come to the table over and over again.
9 years.
Yeah, and we pay concept designers thousands of pounds to produce these wonderful perceptions of what they'll look like.
Yes.
And then you never get the money to deliver them, and they're just filed away.
Yeah.
So I looked at that and I thought, right, okay, so if you haven't got the money, you do have assets.
Yes.
So you own other buildings, and you own other properties. So if that was me, I'd just sell one of them.
Yes.
So there is a chain link here.
Yes,
so you sell. So you take the current district council offices and you sell them to KES, and you sell them to KES to allow KES to expand and bring more people into the school, which will again increase their revenue, bring more people into the community, and then you buy the BHS building with the money that and then you create. I don't know whether you've ever seen this. There's a place in Birmingham called WeWork. And it's this incredible, elaborate building in Colmore Row. which has been converted into a working space for anyone. You can hire an office for an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year, or whatever your budget is, and it has amazing meeting rooms. Ideally, so I would convert that building into a WeWork space, but incorporate the district council activity into part of it, and then allow up and coming small local businesses to have a facility that they can use without having to worry about buying or leasing an office.
Sure.
They have a place that they could walk into town and utilise every day, and while they're in there, they're going to spend, maybe get a coffee or a sandwich, and it brings people into that area again.
Yep.
These are the things that people need to think more detailed about what's best for the area.
Yeah.
And not just panic and say, wow, let's put more retail in there, or let's put more
Primark, what I get about you, what I read from our conversations is that you have ideas, you think outside the box compared to a lot of other people, and you've got energy, and you're a good communicator, and I think we need people like you. You know,
it needs to be. It needs. I mean, I've done a lot of interviews over the last few weeks for various sectors, and I talked about the first job that I ever had in manufacturing, and there's one thing that's always irritated me. I talked about going into manufacturing and never really wanting to go into it. I was an art student, and then decided I wasn't going to pursue that career. And my dad said to me, "You need to get a job." So I ended up working.
Proper job.
Yeah. So I ended up working for a manufacturing company. And as soon as I was in that manufacturing centre, I became fascinated with machinery, processes, systems. And there was one thing from day one that irritated me, and that was people who used to say, "We've always done it this way."
That's funny.
And right from a very young age, I always used to look at a machine and think, what if we did this? Or what if we changed that round? And I have to say, my dearly beloved wife always goes crazy when I tell her some of these stories. Believe me, there was a machine once that I looked at, and I remember us testing this on a piece of kit with a washing up bottle and a bracket and some material draining out of it, and from just a whim, I thought it would work.
Yes,
it did work, and it saved that company thousands of pounds because it processed this particular thing at sort of 20,000 an hour instead of 2,000 an hour, and they went on to build a bespoke machine on my design, and they ended up selling them all around the world. I never got a penny.
Wow! Well, I think John gave a company some ideas, and they've been making money off them. You didn't have an interest in that, did you, John?
So to me, I give this a different perspective. You know, as I said, I've never went to university, but I created my own almost university degree of moving into different industries, and so, believe me, I've been in lots of companies sometimes where somebody sat down and we've been in a meeting and somebody's going, "Oh, this can't be done and that can't be done," and I've just said, "Yeah, it can."
Well, that's what we want.
And it can because I've done it, and this is what we're going to do.
I can so resonate. I mean, I've talked to you privately another time about my story. It was very similar. Going into engineering, hearing people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, which means things stay inefficient. They work, but they don't work very well.
I told this story to someone yesterday about the second job that I went into, and there was I got some overalls. And the first day, so I've gone there as the site manager, but for the first 6 months, I put overalls on every day, and I stood with an operative on a machine to understand how every machine worked.
Right.
And I remember this one guy telling me all about this machine, and he said, we do 2 different processes on this machine, and then when I changed to the second one, it's a 16-hour changeover time. And I went, 16 hours? I went, wow. So I said, I've never known a machine take that long to change over.
No.
I went, when you get some work in for that particular process, come and find me, and I'm interested. Well, so a few weeks later, he did that, and he said, I'm starting on it now, and I went, okay. And a few hours later, I got a knock on the door, and it was this guy, and he went, I've changed that over, now it's up and running. And I looked at my watch, and I went, that's 8 hours from now then. I said, not 16. I said, because that's all it's taken you. I said, so well done. I said, you've improved.
Yes, you made a run.
And believe me, in the end, we got that down to 2.5 hours.
Wow. Just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely need people like you wandering through the halls of power, Westminster, these archaic systems, and just looking around and observing things and then making suggestions. I think even one person, I mean,
I've often described, I always describe, my mind, Pauline always says to me, write everything down. When they come into your mind, write them down.
Yeah.
I always describe my mind, it's almost like a continual flow of like little post-it notes moving around with different ideas on.
Yes.
And it never stops working.
Well, I'm sure some of them are quite good.
Yeah.
I have the same kind of thing go on. And I have my own ideas for the BHS as well.
Yeah.
I think there's certainly room for some kind of public debate about what
I think
should
there's
happen
lots
with
of people who have very different ideas.
Yes, very different bowling alleys.
But what everyone has to remember is first you have to have the money to buy it. And two...
Well, unless you've got a scheme to...
And two, then it has to be commercially viable in some way on a large scale.
Yes.
And I know there are a huge percentage of people who would love a bowling alley in there. But what you have to remember is, would it be financially viable for the company that we're operating?
And would it be...
And would it last?
And would it be an attraction? Would it be adding something to the town? But I mean, okay, everyone's got their ideas, and they should all be heard, I suppose. But there's room. It can't be. I don't think it can be left just to a couple of councillors down the SDC to decide what happens to it, because obviously...
I mean, I have to say, during my mayoral year, I had many conversations with the guy that they're now talking to.
Yeah.
And believe me, I'm pretty confident he's just sitting waiting for someone to come along and offer him more money than he paid for it.
Yes.
Even when he put the planning permission in for the hotel, which was granted, I can assure you, because he told me, there was no hotel chain that would accept that was in there to actually deliver.
I'm sure something could be done if we all just turn our minds to it, and people would come forward if it was viable and so on, and we all agreed it was a good idea, or enough people agreed it's a good idea. I'm sure it could be done. It's just like anything, it's a question of turning your mind to the problem, isn't it? And bringing the right people on board and allowing everyone to make their contribution. Don't shut anybody up, just let everybody chip in, and then
Of course, there is if there is another model that you could use. So if you look at Leeds city centre, then at one point they had a huge empty building in their city centre.
Right.
And it was big enough to house John Lewis. So collectively, the people who were in charge of Leeds at the time approached John Lewis and said, we'll give you that building for 2 years for nothing, if you take it.
Right.
And they took it. And what that did is it dragged other people into the city centre then that wanted to be there because John Lewis were there.
Sure.
And it reduced their unoccupied buildings.
we have to look at the thing holistically, don't we? What's the attraction to Stratford?
But if you just sit back and hope and pray that guy's going to do something with that property, and in another 2 years' time it will probably still be there as it is now.
Well, it's just one more thing I want to say, and then I want to just perhaps wrap up. So at the hustings, what I liked was when the subject of, for example, Brexit came up, all the other candidates tiptoed around it. Nobody wanted to say, because they know, that half the people in the country, or just over half, voted to leave. And they all get very upset if you start even talking about possibly reconsidering our position. So they just tiptoe around. They don't want to.
Because they don't want to lose votes.
They don't want to lose a vote. Exactly. And that isn't the right way to sort things out. You're just worried about who's going to vote for you, whether you're going to vote. But at least you spoke your truth.
Well, everything that I speak about, really, is from personal experience. It's from personal experience.
Yeah.
And, I know a huge amount of people in the manufacturing sector, and I can assure you, every one of them was incredibly annoyed with the fact that what happened in that situation and how it's affected their business.
Yes, and people were lied to. And I mean, even that bust, the 350 million, has the NHS seen that? Nigel Farage, on the day after the vote, admitted that he knew that wasn't right, that figure wasn't right, but he didn't speak up during the campaign, did he? Why? Because it would have lost them votes, wouldn't it? If they suddenly said, oh no, that's not true, that's a lie. So we were lied to, misled. And are there any benefits? The question was asked, have we seen any benefits from leaving?
If I look at the business I'm currently working in now, then the people I'm working with, I worked with over 10 years ago in the same industry. And during that period, 90% of our top work, most profitable work, was in and out of Europe. So if I take that to now, we do nothing. So all of our work now, I'd say 99% of our work currently is all in the UK.
But we can't just avoid subjects just because they might lose us votes. We've got to, if there's a problem, we need to be able to look at things. It hasn't worked, or we were misled, we're now looking at it. Have we had any benefits from it? No. So, okay, we should be able to revisit and look at this thing sensibly. We shouldn't be blocked by people just going, well, I voted to leave, and so that's how it's going to stay. No. We can evolve, can't we? We can review things and make different decisions. So that's great. And now, Stratford, of course, isn't the only town in the constituency. There are other ones. Are you going to get around to them?
Well, we've been to Ulster. We went to Ulster a couple of weeks ago. We obviously, I've been doing some community work in the village of Ilmington recently, so I have some great connections there. So we were there a few nights ago.
Yep.
We've got a lot of supporters there. Henley and Arden, I did live in for a while, so I've got some contacts there. And there are also some people associated with, obviously, the sports club I'm involved in from that area.
Right.
So we'll get round to all of them before the election.
Shipston.
Shipston were there over the weekend.
Wellsbourne. They're in the constituency.
Yeah. We'll get round to them all. I'm taking the week. Yeah. I'm taking the week off work before the election.
Yes.
And I'll plough a lot into that week as well. But we certainly will get. What we're trying to do is find people who've got some form of event on during that, which has got local interest there, and then you've got a lot of people all in one area. Sure.
I mean, Stratford is the capital of the constituency, but
we've got a plan. Maybe that final week, maybe put something together to invite people in and do a Q&A if they've got any questions. But we're just looking for a location.
Well, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
I really do. I've said you have my vote. I organised this today so that hopefully that might help a bit.
Well, I can't thank you enough. The first interview we did was amazing. The offer of doing this hopefully will help my campaign, and hopefully for the amount of people that watch this who don't know me, they may get a different perspective of maybe what they thought. For sure, there is nobody out there probably in that group of people who knows the area better than I do. I've lived here the longest.
Have you spoken to any farmers yet?
I know some farmers.
You know some
actually.
farmers?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just a rural.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
a rural kind of area.
I know a very good farmer actually. So,
Uh-huh.
and we keep in touch with her on a regular. So during the mayoral year, obviously, the High Sheriff through that year, he's they own a farm in the Shipston area. So you know, I've spoken to her on a number. She can't support me because of her. She still has an association to the Lord Lieutenancy. So she can't come down on any one side. But I've listened to her, and they've had great difficulties, obviously due to the weather conditions earlier in the year. And there's another thing that was affected by Brexit as well, because obviously the EU
Subsidies.
and
so on. Yes.
Yeah. So totally understand it. However, if I look at farming industry in general, if I look in other regions, I've known farmers who've diversified. So they've converted barns to Airbnbs, wedding venues.
Yes.
Go-karting experiences.
Glamping.
Yes, so like every business, sometimes I'll use that term that you use. You have to think outside the box.
Okay.
And look for different revenue sources.
Yes, they've got the land. And I have some ideas for farmers as well. Which I'd love to talk to them about. Well, Kevin, I think we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
There.
Yeah, thank you very much
now.
Indeed. Yeah.
I hope that helps some.
Well, hopefully, yeah.
We've got a great spot here. We've got that 500-year-old bridge there.
Yeah.
We do have some kind of parliamentary connections. Stratford. The Earl of Leicester, Simon de Montfort, was the individual who organised the first ever parliament in the UK, supposedly, to look at some national concern at the time. And then in the latter 30s, they had contingency plans to move Parliament to the theatre here.
I know all about I knew all about that. Yeah.
A little bit of connection with Stratford there. But anyway. So that's it. Lovely. Thanks again.
Thank you very much
indeed.
Thanks
for coming. And I'm glad we had a lovely day. And thanks to everybody who involved in John and everybody and Heather involved in hosting it. And Henry, of course.
Thanks, Henry.
I left the credits to the end this time because I got feedback from people saying, perhaps do it further down.
And a huge thank you to my wife.
Indeed. Thank you and goodbye. Yeah.